Hello and welcome to today's webinar on building unified teams for connected customer data. I'm Megan Winnery, Director of Growth Marketing at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 30 minutes and will be recorded, and the slides in the recording of the presentation will be made available at the end of the session. You'll also find some related resources in the attachments and links section that you can view during or after the webinar. And we want to hear your questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit them. And for any questions that we aren't able to answer live, we'll follow up with you after the presentation is over. And lastly, you'll see the social hashtag for today's webinar in the lower right-hand corner of our deck, hashtag Telium Customer Data Webinar. We encourage you to retweet, like, and share as we live tweet throughout the webinar. All right, now for today's presenter. Prolette Miteva is Senior Product Manager for Analytics at Autodesk. She is laying the data foundation for Autodesk's products and digital properties, always chasing the ever-elusive complete view of the customer. With a combination of skills and passion for user experience, engineering, and analytics, Prolette bridges the gap between business and technology for better customer experience and business success. She is a San Francisco chapter leader for the Digital Analytics Association and president of the nonprofit Measure Camp San Francisco. All right, Prolette, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to briefly walk you through the agenda, and then we're going to dive right in. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about alignment, teams, and lastly, the human side of data. So we're going to just jump right in and start from the first part around alignment. I truly believe that this is where a lot of what we are doing starts. And when we talk about alignment, we usually have some usual suspects that either help us or not during our journey. The first one is silos, and that is where we have our separate teams, separate agendas, separate organizational structures, everything that can make or break a lot of what our company is trying to accomplish as a whole. Now, we have all heard this talking over and over, and I'm going to go into a few items that I think that can help and part of the journey of removing those silos and bridging the gap between teams. The second part in the usual suspects of affecting our ability to be aligned is really disconnected systems. And I'm pretty sure that everyone is familiar with a lot of what is happening there. We have different teams deploying their own platforms. We have different teams using their own tools and systems in order to accomplish their goals, which, while commendable in a lot of times, it might not be really the right decision for the whole company. It might not be a decision where we can go after the one goal that should unify everyone. The last item is about executive support. And we really talk about that a lot in pretty much probably any conference that you go to, any discussions that you go into, different webinars, you will hear that we really need executive support. And that is true, and I would say has been true for the longest time. It is hard to get, and it is very, very important. So while we're going to go a little bit into it, we're going to talk a little bit more and see if there are some answers there. Now, ultimately, when we talk about these three items, we roll up into three higher level items, which is organization. This is how we're structured in our companies, how we are organized in different divisions under different leadership. The technology, which should be our tool and not our burden. And again, executive support. And yes, executive support doesn't change on a higher level, but ultimately that is one of the most important things that we can get at the top. So talking about how we can deal with some of the organizational challenges. One suggestion that I have for that is deploying a role of evangelist, somebody that can go and evangelize the data, evangelize the technology that is being utilized within the company, and overall promote the joy of data. I know it might seem a little strange for some companies where you are very separated into different silos, but having somebody that can go across the organization, help and educate people across, again, the organization, it can be very, very helpful. A second option to bridge the gaps around organization is really deployment of pods. And that might be a choice more if you're a bigger company and you have more resources. But pods is the idea of getting people together with a unified goal with different skill sets that can accomplish that goal. For an example for that is you might create a pod that is fully focused on deploying a certain marketing strategy that you're trying to achieve with your customers. And the pod would have people that have engineering skills, analytics skills, A/B testing skills, marketing skills, basically an overall full coverage of the skill sets needed in order to execute that campaign. It can work very well, especially if you have a very big company and you're trying to accomplish a particular marketing strategy. The last idea for bridging the gaps in organizations is creating a center of excellence. Now that might end up to be actually multiple center of excellence based on how much you want to concentrate on a particular topic. So you might have a center of excellence for analytics, you might have a center of excellence for data science, you might have a center of excellence for optimization, but ultimately you have that group of people that can guide your company towards its North Star. And that can be, again, probably more of a solution for a bigger company where you have in some cases, the luxury of as many resources. When we move to the technology part, it's very important to unify around a one data platform. It is very hard to talk between different departments around what have we achieved, what are our metrics, what is our performance, what is our ROI, when all the different teams are looking at different data platforms, looking at different data, and not having single point of truth. Now, a unified data platform would often also lead you to creating a unified schema, which is the second very important part when talking about the same language across the company. You can't have unified data unless you have the same language when you're describing things like your customer, your accounts, your visits, your marketing efforts. You have to be able to talk in the same terms across the whole organization. Lastly, on the technology, I would say do not underestimate the value of having good user experience and easy activation. Ultimately, when you're creating a technology platform, you are creating a technology platform for your not so technology friendly group. And that can be very, very hard for them if the expectation is the barrier for entry is much higher if you don't have a good UX and easy activation, because your users are expecting for this to be easy. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're going to talk about executive support, but I think that topic has been covered so much, and also I think that it is very, very dependent on how your company is structured and who is your executive. You can either have the easiest time of getting executive support, or you can have the hardest time getting the executive support, and that is very dependent on your leadership. So I would basically say, save yourself. But also there is a lot of resources online that can help you with some directions. Now moving to empowering your teams. The first part around empowering your teams is obviously building your team. and providing them good data, and ultimately educate. When we're talking about building your team, a lot of people would say that curiosity killed the cat. But really, I would say the saying is curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. A very, very important skill or talent, more so, that your team needs to have is curiosity. That, from my point of view, is very, very important for the purposes of analytics and any kind of work in data. Without curiosity, we don't have that urge to find the answers. We don't have the urge to dig in deeper and to actually dive in and try to find insights. And we all know that we need insights. We don't just need numbers. So curiosity is an important trait that your team needs to have. A lot of that is hard to look at when you are interviewing and you're looking at accomplishment-based resumes. That doesn't really show you how the user behaves, where the curiosity is, what they're trying to get to, and what are they really interested in. So from that standpoint, make sure that when you're talking and interviewing with your candidates, try to find that more behavioral experience. What led them to where they are now, what led them to solving the problems. Ultimately, a lot of what you're looking at to have in your team as well is common sense. And common sense is really, really a hard thing to find, and you might have to wait to see how the person behaves once they're on the team. But common sense helps in a lot of cases to question the data, to question the questions, to question the way the stakeholders you're working with are asking you to do things. And it always comes to the ability to be able to more actively ask why. Now, all of this really is not going to be very exciting for your team unless you provide your team with the good data. And the importance of good data is because not just for your company, not just for your company's success, but for the purposes of exciting your users to try and find the insights and not just constantly struggle with fixing data, doing ETL, and trying to solve issues on the data side. The moment you get to good data, you are going to have a much more engaged team, and you're going to have a much more excited team to work on the items that you have to accomplish. And outside of that, you also have to ensure that you educate your team, but educate also the others. Then from education perspective, I would say there are two parts that you need to think about. The first is the platform skills. This is where we talk about actual technology, the tools, the UX, how are you using the actual tools that you have in your toolbox. But a very, very important skill to teach is the analytic skills, the analysis. How do you interpret data? How do you understand data? That is especially important when you start thinking about educating outside of your immediate analyst teams. When you start educating your marketers, when you start educating your stakeholders, you are still going to face a lot of people that are not really sure how to interpret data and how to understand data. And it is your job to do that education. Ultimately, the more you do this, the more you educate the users outside of your team, it creates a good atmosphere because no one likes to be a team of one. Even if you are a team of one right now, the more you can get the buying and the excitement of the people around you, you're quickly going to find curious people that you can converse, discuss, and talk about data. Which kind of leads into talking a little bit about the human side of data. And we all know, and I'm not sure what the audience is here, but we all know that as analysts and people in data, we love our numbers. Numbers are our friends, but they're not everyone's friends. So it is important to try and bridge that gap. Try and talk to your stakeholders, talk to your partners in terms and in context that is closer to them, that is important for them. And that might mean that you might have to learn some additional skills. You might need to learn some additional terminology in order to talk more in context. But it's really important to put everything in other people's context in order for, first of all, for them to understand it better, but second, it makes them much more receptive to any idea that you might have or any approach that you might want to take that might initially have been different from theirs. It's important to have that conversation, and it's important to lead a little bit more with empathy than with numbers. Talk to them, try to understand their problems, and try to see how you yourself can actually help solve those problems. The moment you try to help somebody, I can guarantee you that their attitude will probably change if it was not very good towards you initially. All of this is really going in the direction to try and put our differences aside and try to promote a better working relationship with our stakeholders and partners, because no matter what differences we might have between analytics and different marketing or engineering or whatever your stakeholders are, we have to learn to live well and interact well with each other, because that is the best way we're going to provide the best ROI for our company, and we're going to accomplish our company's goals in the best way. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight 3 items that I think that are very important, and we covered them already, but just as a highlight. Unify your organization and technology. It's very important. It's going to be the foundation for you going and achieving your goals in the future. Along with that, you need to ensure that you're always building your team and you're educating everyone. That will be defining your success as a team, but also your success as being a data-driven company in the future. And finally, put things in other people's perspectives. You will be surprised at how much further you can actually get if you are actively trying to solve other people's problems while still maintaining your agenda and trying to succeed in what your initial effort is. And with that, I am leaving it to Q&A, and I would love to get questions and start the discussions on this.
Thanks so much, Perlette. All right, for everyone, please ask your questions in the Ask a Question feature, and we will get to them right now. All right, so it looks like the first question is, you mentioned a unified schema can help with disconnected technologies and systems. Can you expand on what a unified schema is and how it helps?
So that really is talking the same language across the organization. So when one team discusses their, let's say, monthly active users, and another team talks about monthly active users, if those definitions are not the same, and if those numbers are not coming from the same platform, you're always going to have the issue of what is my source of truth, what is correct, and I don't trust the data. And I'm sure that a lot of you have heard that all the time. Oh, but our data is not good. Oh, and I don't trust our data. the best way to do that is to unify the language and unify the technology, because then even if there is a disagreement between, like, is the data right or not, you're talking about one source and one source with the same language. And that is where the unified schema is really important.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, next question. When it comes to empowering teams, you mentioned education. What specific techniques have you seen work as far as educating teams?
So I think there's two parts of the educating teams. One, and the first most obvious one, is probably for people to think about, oh, I'm going to send somebody to a class, or I'm going to send somebody to a conference. And those are like great places. Webinars like that that we're currently having is also a great place to go and explore outside of the company what is available. But then there is also the part about educating within the company, because then you can actually talk to people in the terms of and the data that they understand. They're looking at each day and they're trying to understand. So educating internally is important. So from that perspective, I would say that you need to actually run education sessions inside and educate people on the data or the tools that you're currently having. And just a word of advice, it actually takes a lot of work to develop some of these education sessions, but they're totally worth it. Other options for that is to have like a scheduled meetings to talk with your analysts or the most immediate stakeholders in order to understand a little bit more their problems, but also educate them on what you have done recently or try to resolve problems. And lastly, there are also capabilities that you can deploy, like office hours, where you make yourself available for a certain time on a certain period, like either weekly or monthly, and make yourself available for just informal Q&A where people can come and ask you and interact with you on a more informal basis. So those are I would say all the things that I can recommend.
Great, thanks, Perlette. All right, next question. For enduring executive support, what is the best bargain to make? Are there key promise metrics to commit to other than not messing it up?
I think that it's, again, the age-old question of trying to understand why. Trying to understand what is the motivation of that executive, and I can guarantee you in some cases that might not always be just the following the goals of the companies. So in some cases, and unfortunately that happens sometimes in organization when you might have some political landscapes that you need to navigate, really what the executive might want is to either solidify their position or kind of promote their position in a good light. So trying to understand the reason, not just behind the numbers, but also the actual motivation, I think is important. Because then from your side, you can start thinking of how can I make that more of a success for that person so they can continue to support what I'm trying to do. So I think it's a little bit more on the working to your stakeholders' advantage a little bit and understanding their ultimate goal. I'm not saying that you should disregard numbers from that perspective, but try to think about how to approach it that benefits that executive in some way other than I'm just going to deliver a report to you. It might be more that, okay, you want me to deliver a report to you, but ultimately you are trying to actually showcase that report to the CEO, let's say, and tell me a little bit more about what the CEO might be a little bit more interested in, so I can help you create a better report. Again, because not everyone might be as data savvy as we all are. I'm hoping that answered the question.
Thanks, Paulette. All right, next question. What are some steps you recommend taking to ensuring data quality or quality data?
I think that there is a lot that can be done around data quality, and honestly, that is probably a very long discussion that is probably needs a completely different webinar. But one thing that I would say that where it's really important is to think about data quality at your source, meaning when you're generating your data and when you're collecting your data initially, you really need to think about data quality there, because with this way, you're not going to have to think about doing ETLs or data modification down the line. So doing it at the source and at the very start is probably of utmost importance. And a lot of from that perspective is you can go through and have tools that they can check your data, but thinking ahead of time and developing your data schema, data strategy from the start is of the utmost importance. That will save you a lot of troubles down the line.
All right, thanks so much, Paulette. Well, that's all the questions that we have for today. I wanted to point out that we do have additional resources in the attachment section that you can check out. Paulette has a report as part of our industry expert series, so hear more from her there. And then we also have another webinar on data quality as part of the industry expert series as well, so be sure to check those out. And thank you everyone for your time and for joining. And Paulette, thank you very much for sharing all of your information. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll be talking with you soon.